What's up, guys? Alex here with more GameMaker tutorials for beginners. Last topic was compiling and debugging, so we went over how to run code, what that kind of looked like, an intro to that. Again, this is just this beginning part's kind of an intro series. So today's topic, we're going to be doing a little bit of coding today. We're going to be messing with objects, but we'll just be going through all the different assets in the game. We'll be building out specifically an object with a sprite. I'll be showing you the 9 slice on the tile set. And some other things like that. But we'll be going through every object or every asset and kind of defining it and showing what it does. And then, of course, if you want to follow this tutorial series, it's a very basic series meant to be for the non-coder, just to get them up to speed using GameMaker, teaching a little bit of that JavaScript. Just hit that sub button below. Alright guys, so today is the asset overview. So we're going to be going through this little bar over here to the right, and we're going to be going through each of these assets. We'll be talking about what they are, what they do, giving you guys just sort of a high-level overview of each one. I'll be going into depth on a few, and we'll be looking at a little bit of code so we can have a little bit of fun today. We'll build one of these out. But if you guys are following along with this series, then make sure that you only have to have the stuff that's not in folders. So I'm building out some extra stuff for this series. So I have these extra folders in here. If you ever see something like that's not in a folder, like this R museum here, that's what you need. So in this case, you guys will have room 1. We're going to start off with these rooms. Rooms are like levels in the game. So if you think of them, they could be like the interior of a house, like somebody could be walking around an open world, a giant open world, go into a house, and all of a sudden the map becomes really small, so you'll have a room for that. In this case, we're just going to be making a museum room where we're going to put some different objects and some different functionality, and just going to be like a demo room that if you guys had this, you can come in here and pull different code for different things. So I just call it our museum here. But what you can do to create a new room is right-click, create, and you'll create a room. And then you'll notice that we have some other stuff up here. This is our museum. This is that main square we made last time, a little rectangle room. Down here in the corner is the width and height. Here is room 2. We can actually change this, so if we wanted this to be really small, like 100 by 100, here we could just make this a little prison cell. And this might be, I don't know, you just go in here, it's like a little closet. Tink! It's like, not very big. So it could be its own size though. You can see these rooms are different. These rooms have different layers in them, so depending on where you put an object in the game, we'll go over objects, they'll live on these different layers, and then the objects that are higher up on the layers will get drawn last, so they'll be on top of everything else. So like if you have a guy flying, he's going to be on the top layer because he's going to be above all the trees and all that, or whatever your idea is. You might have these different instance layers, and these of course can be renamed too, but we'll go into depth deeper about these different layers. The only other one is this background layer. This is where you'd set like the background for the certain rooms. Like if we wanted to change this room, we go over here to this background layer, we're going to change it to like green. Now it becomes a little green patch. And then we have some extra stuff we can do here, but we'll go over that later. Again, it's really just width, height, and background color you need. Make sure you switch back to the instance layer because that's where you're going to be dropping objects. In this case, we're just going to delete room 2 because we don't need it at this time. So we're going to switch back to the assets bar here. We're going to right click on room 2. We're going to delete it. And we're going to leave our menu, which we right click, rename here. And then you can rename it to our museum. So again, rooms are like the levels. They can represent anything, just the confinement. Oh, one more thing about the hierarchy of rooms. So if we have a second room here and we click into here, this little house is which room the game will start in. So if you want to change this hierarchy, like if you were creating a whole game and then all of a sudden you have to create a start screen, it's like one of the last things you did, and you want to like create, room start screen, you want it to be number 1, you just go here and you click it. It becomes the top one and one that the game loads in. So in this case, again, we're going to get rid of room 2, so we're going to go ahead and move museum back up, and we're going to right click, delete, and we're going to be in our museum. The next type of asset you should be familiar with, the next one we're going to mess around with, are these objects. So an object is like an entity in the game, so it could be like a player, it could be like an enemy, it could be a bullet, it could be a wall. It just has some code behind it. It could be a scoreboard. So an object here, we're going to make a new object, right click, create, over here to objects. These objects don't look like anything. They're just like They're just code, essentially. They just do something. There's some functionality in the game. What they look like is the sprite here, and there's several ways to set these sprites, so don't get too hung up on this, because in game, in like the code, you can set the sprite of an object, so it can look like different things. Like that's how, like, you know, something could look walking, it's animated, or it could be wearing a certain armor, so the sprite has to change. But initially, what an object looks like is if you had a wall that wasn't going to change, you could set its sprite, it'd just be a static sprite, and we'll look at that. Also, when you're naming things, like we have that R, you notice we had R museum. When you name things, you want to pick a name that starts with, that tells you kind of what the asset is. So in this case, objects, I use O, and then we'll just call it like, we'll call it room. And in this case, we'll call it display one. So in this case, yeah, we call it O display. Each of these, you'll notice some of these are like sequences, shaders, and sounds. So you have to come up with a different initial variable for these, because you can't just use S, they'd all be the same. In this case, we'll go over sprites, but I use sprites for S, and then these other ones like scripts, I'd use like SCR, which we'll see. But again, going back to objects here, we have this object. It looks like something. It has some different things down here. When we start getting into like physics, like if you were going to make a platformer game, we use physics because then you have gravity, and so it's pulling everything down to the bottom of the screen. In this case, we're just ours is gonna be like a top-down view for right now, and we're just gonna leave everything unchecked. You have these different things here. Don't worry about all these. The only thing you're really gonna be working in right now is events. And events are like, we'll say actions or like steps in the game. So like, for example, you'll have these different like create events. So when an object is created, this event runs. If an object gets destroyed, this event runs. You have all these different ones you can put every time. The step event is every time the game cycles, every cycle. So it's probably like every frame, but there's ways we can measure that. We'll make a debug menu too for this museum. But every cycle of code, this one runs every second or whatever it is the step event. So we want to put a lot of code into here, but then you can also break your code out into these different other like micro events. Like this is on collision with another object. So if two objects hit each other, and we'll look at that. If a certain key is pressed or the certain mouse button is pressed, you can add stuff. You can also add that stuff to steps. So there's a lot of different places you can add things. And it just depends on how you want to lay out your code and how clean your code is to read, where you'd want to add it. Some things we're going to add as scripts. So we're going to write scripts for them, and then we're going to add them into the code into certain places so the step event stays nice and clean. But just starting off here, we're going to, so we have this object. We're going to create a sprite here. So we're going to click this, create sprite. You can also, this will create a sprite, it'll create it right here in the objects folder. You can also right click create sprite or right click create sprite here and just move it where you need to. But here we're going to create sprite here. You'll notice it came up under, actually it came up under sprite because that's what we had highlighted. So that's perfect. We're going to rename it here. Actually, we'll just open it up. So you can rename it here. We have this little bar over here that we set up, this inspector. So now that we're selected on sprite 1, this inspector allows us just to rename it right here. So we can just call this S sprite. We can open the image here. So this is this little guy right here. This little inspector allows us to do all the editing of the sprite we want. We can also just click on this sprite and he'll open up in our workstation here. And we could mess with, see, it's all the same options. Like we scroll down here, we have the collision mask, it's the same window. It's just in our little workstation. Remember, we can edit this. So once we're working with the sprite, if you're doing a lot of sprite work, you might want to just collapse everything like we did. We click this little button right here, it collapses, and then we can do some sprite work. So we're going to edit this image. We're going to keep this pretty basic. First thing, here, let me back out real quick and show you something on the sprite. Right here is its size, so we can adjust the size. So let's just make this 128 by 128, just be a bigger square. Just to show you we can change it. You can also unclick this button and make it a weird dimension, like then it won't keep the same aspect ratio. In this case, we want a square because I'm going to show you some stuff later with the 9 sprite or 9 slice. So we have our guy here is 128 by 128. We're going to go in here to edit image. You can also import an image, like if you wanted to import a certain, like anything. You can download different sprites from on the internet, import them here. In our case, we're going to edit this image and we're going to make a very basic we're just going to dump this, we're going to fill. Let me show you all these different options here for coloring and pixel making. So we're just going to fill this whole thing with white, and then we're going to make a little black border here. So we're going to click the line tool. We're going to adjust the size of our brush here. So you got circles and squares. and we're going to make just a big square. Actually, let's make a little bit thinner square here. I'm going to hold shift and just make this nice long straight line. Same thing here. Same thing here. I can't really see here, so I'm going to move myself out of the way. Undo that, undo that. I use the mouse wheel to zoom out there. I'm going to go ahead and finish this little corner here. That took far too long. Okay, so we have our square here. He looks pretty good. Nothing in the middle here. It's just a nice blank square. We're going to go ahead and close this sprite for now. We're going to close the sprite. We're going to go ahead and pull our menus back up here. We're going to go over to our object here. It now looks like something. It has the sprite here as sprite, so we're going to go ahead and go to our room. We're going to drop our sprite now into the instance. So we're on the instances layer here in our room. We're going to go back over to our assets deal here, and we're going to grab our object. It's now oDisplay1. We're going to put it up here in the top left corner, and now it becomes an object in the game that when we run this, we now have a thing in the corner, but it doesn't do anything. See, I'm pushing the WASD keys for movement. Nothing happens, so let's fix that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our object. We're going to add an event. We're going to say this is going to be a step event. It opens up this coding block here. We're again going to clear out our menus here so we can code a little bit. Open this up. Up here, we'll talk about these descriptions later, but these are helpful when you're making functions. For now, we're just going to add a little bit of basic functionality here. We're going to, when you start coding here in the step event, remember this is the event that's run every frame. So when you start coding, you'll see we have all these built-in little variables and stuff we can call. So this is really helpful in GameMaker. In this case, I just typed key, and now we're going to look for the keyboard check. So it's going to be keyboard check press. So what we're going to do is we're going to see if this ordinary key, so this is just a specific thing. You have to know that you call this ordinary. And this is my bad, lowercase ord there. We're going to put the W in parentheses here and close this. And we're going to say, so this is checking now for the W key being pressed. So we're going to add an if statement to say if this key is pressed, then something happens. Well, what's that something? Well, it goes in this little bracket here. So we're going to move these brackets down, and we're going to start writing inside our if. In this case, it's going to be very small. All we want to do, actually, we're going to set up a couple variables here just so we can see what's going on. Again, we can skip a lot of the stuff. A lot of what we're going to be doing is the very, very high level, very basic stuff. So I'm going to try to lay everything out for you guys. Of course, there's going to be shorter ways and easier ways to do this, but just for the beginners so they can see everything, we're going to do some different things like set up this variable here. This object has an x value. Its x value is determined by a little thing here in the sprite. Here, let me bring this menu back and show you real quick so we know what we're talking about. So in the sprite, this guy right here is where this thing is being drawn from. So this is its XY coordinate inside the game, and where I drop that in the room is its XY coordinate. So it starts at 0 and increases this way, bigger and bigger and bigger, and its Y coordinate starts at 0 here and increases downward. So it's kind of inverted from what you'd think, but increasing in GameMaker is down for Y. So it's to the right for X and down for Y. So now we're going to jump back over to the object here. Inside this object, so when we hit the W button, we want the object to go up. So that is negative Y. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this object's position Y equals Y. So they have this built-in variable that already captures the object's position Y. So we could just use this variable, but in this case, we're just going to set it. So every time this code runs through, this object, it hits this thing right here, it looks at what the current Y position is, and it sets it to this variable right here. So now we're going to say this variable, if you hit the W button right here, we want y to get smaller, right? So if y is smaller, we want to subtract 1 from it. So we're just going to use the subtract. This will just subtract 1 from this variable and then resave this variable as itself. So this is like this is equivalent to, I'll show you here. This line of code is equivalent to this line of code. So if you do minus minus, it just means you're taking this object position and making it equal to 1 less than what it was just equal to. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test this code and we're going to see if this works. Oh, one thing we didn't do is resave the y here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this object position and we're going to say y equals object position. So that means that right here what we're doing is we're taking this object position, we're looking at where it's at on the y-axis, we're saving it to a variable. We're saying if the W key is being pressed right now, take this variable and subtract 1 from it. And then what I want you to do is save this object's y position. Its new y position is whatever this variable is. So it's going to be 1 less than what it just was. So hopefully this makes the object move up the screen. And you'll notice he is moving up the screen. So success. So now what we need to do is we need to replicate this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this. And typically you want to always be vetting your stuff because you don't want to copy and paste bad code over and over and over or some problem code. We're going to change the different letters here to make them move a different directions. So W-A, really W-S, put an S here, A, D. Now we're going to think about each letter and what we want it to do. So in this case, one thing we want to do is set a X variable, set an X variable that's equivalent to this Y variable. I'm going to call it an X here. We're going to do I'm hitting control, that's why. And we're going to do equals X underscore. Now we're going to check each of these. So S, we want it to go down, so that's going to be positive Y. So we want that variable to go up by 1. If it is right here, if it's A, we want it to go to the left, so that's going to be X, and it's going to be a negative. And then here, D, we want it to go to the right, so that's going to be X. And you can see how we could set any keys to this. So you could make spacebar make them go to the right or whatever, make a mouse click make them go to the right. In this case, we're just going to do some standard stuff. We're going to make it plus plus. And then we're going to save the new object's X position as, and then now we're going to play our game here. We now have an object that when I press, he moves around. Only 1 pixel at a time though, that is kind of slow, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to fix that. We're going to change this here to, instead of minus minus, we're going to set a new variable here, call it movement. So this is how far we want, how many, we'll call it pixel movement. So we always want to name, so back in the old days, people tried to name their stuff as short as possible. That was because of typing. But now you can see we have all these built-in, this little built-in screen here. So as we name variables and as they become available to us, or we name functions, we can type real fast where it just becomes the first thing and we hit tab and it comes up. In this case, we're going to call it object movement distance equals, we're going to go 10 pixels at a time. And we're going to say that object Y position now equals object Y minus this distance. Actually, we'll take it from this equal sign right here. We're going to do the same thing for all the other ones here. Don't forget, there we go. Don't forget to get rid of this. That'll give you some errors. So yeah, we're setting all these equal. Now we're going to have to go back and change these X's right here. Don't forget to always change these. This is one reason why copying code is never a good idea. because you might have just one little mistake like this, and it's just going to jack your stuff up. You won't understand why it's doing what it's doing. But it's all good now, and in this case, we also want to make these pluses, because again, if we're hitting D, we want it to go to the right, and if we're hitting S, we want it to go down. And now when we run this code, we have our object, and he's moving by 10 pixels at a time anytime we move around. Alright, so we basically get the idea there. The next thing I want to show you is, so this is a lot of code, right? This is right in our object. This is just for movement, and it's already getting this long. I understand we added extra variables here. We could just do some XX stuff. But what we can do here to make this cleaner is we can invoke a new asset called a script. So in this case, we have some scripts here. We're going to go ahead and create a new script. We're going to call it, up here, it's got its script3 name. We're going to call it SCR. We're going to call it movement script. So this is going to be their script for all, we'll actually call it player movement here. It'll be a little bit even longer, more explicit. So this will be all player movement. We'll keep different functions in here. In this case, this player movement, we'll just call this player movement standard. Remember, you want to have a different function name than your actual script name, because you might have some different functions in here and you want to call this function, you don't want to call this script. So we're going to call this function player movement standard underscore standard. That way it's like a denotation if we have some other ones. We're going to take all that code we had in our object here. We're going to copy all this. We're going to drop it into our script function here. So now all we have to do is call this function here, and it'll just run this script for us. Now, one thing about setting up this so it's standard, anytime you have this function, you kind of want to take all this stuff and tab it in so that these little braces line up with whatever opens the brace. So you can see like this one should be tabbed in, because, always got to undo. This one right here has got to be tabbed in, because see, this if lines up with this bracket, so you know where your brackets are. You know that all your brackets are good. It's one good practice. Also on GameMaker, a lot of times it starts with the brackets underneath here. I don't like that as much as starting them at the end of the line. It's just a habit I've gotten into, or that some coders get into. So that's one thing you might want to do. But these brackets are really important. Make sure you always have these right here. You need one at the end of your function as well. So we have this function now. It's called player movement standard. We're going to copy it and we're going to drop it back into our object. So now this step function, all it does is call this other script to run, and it continues running its script down the line. So it goes over here, it runs this script, your other script continues to run, so other stuff is happening. It's also allowing you to move a lot. So we'll check this out. Our display is still actively moving around. That script is being called, and our object has one line of code in it. So this is just a way to keep your stuff clean. You can see why scripts are useful. They basically act the same as writing code in here, but just for stuff that you do lots and lots, you want to create a script for it. And one of those things is going to be a debug menu. We'll create a bunch of scripts that are just standard scripts you can pull into a lot of your games anytime you're starting, and that way you have like a library of scripts that you can just use right away. We talked about sprites. We talked about all the really important ones, I think. I don't think there was any other ones that I wanted to go over here. Oh, the 9 slice was the last thing here. Let me pull that up here on this slide. So one of the cool features about the new update here in GameMaker is this 9 slice. You could do this in earlier versions, but you had to like code it in. It was a real hassle. I actually just discovered this recently because I wasn't familiar with this. I had to code it back when I was building my projects. But yeah, so we have this 9 slice here, and what we can do is, okay, so we turn this 9 slice on. You can see that we have this activate 9 slice, so we're going to turn that on. We have these different left, right, top, and bottom bars. We have this highlighted inverted. One thing you want to do is do this overlay. That way, it just is. I'll show you later what that does, but it's just a weird thing. They have that as default as inverted, and it's a little bit weird. But we're going to go ahead and pull these lines here to wherever we want. You'll see we can put anything in this this middle here. In fact, we will. In fact, let's edit this image. Let's put a red circle here. Actually, let's do something cool so you guys can really see the power of this 9 slice here. We're gonna get a nice big swatch. We're gonna go bam, 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 bam. We're gonna go with a nice big circle here. Bam. Then we'll go with a few little circles here. Go bam, bam, bam. And we'll go with a blank. That way you guys can see all the different kinds. And so now what we'll do is we'll cut this up into as if, like, let's just say this, at first let's just think of this as a room. So we'll say this outer section is the walls, and the inner section is going to be the floor, and the floor pattern is given by these dots here. There's some different things we can do with this. It doesn't matter how wide these are. They can be even if you want, but you'll see it doesn't really matter. That's what's nice about this 9 slice. So here what we can do is open this up here a little bit wider. You'll see you have these 2 sections here. This is what it'll look like in game based on, you'll see if we stretch it now, it just stretches everything. Based on our settings for this 9 slice, we can change this. So right now we've selected this. We're going to go ahead and say the selected section. So we selected the section here, the center here. We're going to repeat it. So instead of stretching it, we're going to repeat. So now it can create a room where any size room we have, here, let's get rid of this. This is getting in our way. Any size room we have, it just repeats the pattern. You can see why that would be useful. Other things you can do, so let's open it up here. We can make it mirrored. So very interesting. You can think of different reasons why you'd want to use these different. Oh, here's a good one. So instead of blank, we'll just hide. So now we basically have just, you know, something like a message box. And any size message box, it can be moved around. And this is what it'll look like in game. Any size we make it, it'll just repeat these outer sides. Versus before, if you didn't have these, or here, if you, well, we could show you later with the stretching here. It'd just be stretch basically. I mean, there's before, if you had anything in the middle here, it'd be different text. It would stretch the text and stuff like that. So now what it's doing is just copying and pasting the stuff over and over and over. So anyway, so that is really useful. One thing you can use to make dialog boxes. In this case, we're going to make just little display boxes with this. So they might be different sizes. They'll have different code in them that do different things. That way, again, it's like a museum. We can kind of have all the different scripts in one area. And then we'll continue making our game. So the next thing I want to go over here are the last few assets. They're just the other assets that you don't use as often. These ones that we went over today are the main ones that we're going to be starting with in our game. Like animation curves are just for, like, if you're animating a character, it makes it just smoother. We won't use a lot of those very early on at all. Extensions are like external programs or things that you can bring in from the outside that can run in your game. Fonts are, if you're like, there's lots of different arcade fonts and, you know, game fonts out there. You can bring your own font files in or make your own here in GameMaker. You have the notes section. This is just text files. So mine, I'm just laying out all the different parts of our little tutorial we're going to be doing here. Here are objects. We've gone over those. Paths are like if you have a player and he's going down a certain location, or you want him to follow a certain, like maybe he's like guarding a certain area, you want him to go back and forth, or you have like characters in game that have, they're like awake on a certain day and they follow a certain path throughout the day. That's where you load those in. Rooms, of course, are levels in the game, and scripts you've seen are just an area for you to put different functions and call in your game, keep your code a little bit cleaner, and make each script sort of something specific. Like ours is dedicated to movement, but it might be dedicated to creating a dialog box or dedicated to XYZ task. And then that's how you can lay out your game, call that stuff equally. Scripts, you really want to think of things that you're going to be calling a lot. So things that you're not going to do a lot go in your main objects. Things that you do a lot will go in your scripts. Sequences, these are just again, just different, like if you're putting together a cutscene or something like that, you can set it up here in sequences. We're not going to be doing a lot of that real early on. Same thing with shaders, adds like lighting effects to your game. But right now we're learning the basics, so we don't really care about shaders. Sounds are going to be the sound effects. Those are a little bit important because they make it a little bit more fun. You'll see when you don't have sound effects, it's just kind of bland. But we will get to those, little 8-bit sound. Tile sets are just, if you, instead of that 9 slice, you can import tiles like different like layouts of the game. Like if you have an inventory, for example, you have it looking like a certain thing on a certain screen, you could just populate it with this tile set instead, so it could be varying sizes or whatever. Same thing with these timelines. Nobody's ever really used timelines, but it's just a way to create like a timed event in the game. Like if you had a countdown clock or something like that, it can create like a series of timed events or something. Make your games a little bit more dynamic. But yeah, the main ones that we're going to be looking at first are we're going to be working a lot with objects, scripts, the room, and sprites. But coming up on the next topic here, we're going to be looking at like a what is programming. We're going to look at what are variables, arrays. Anyway, all kinds of different stuff we got to learn before we can jump in and start doing some real heavy stuff here. But it should be pretty quick. Those next coming videos will just be like little quick one topic, 4 to 5 minute videos on each. So thanks for sticking around, and we will see you guys next time. What's up, guys? That's it for this video. As always, we are collecting ideas for the upcoming game that we're going to build, so throw them right down there in the comments below. If you have any coding questions or anything like that, throw it down there in the comments. We'll get to every one. And as always, if you want to follow the series, hit that bell.